Hey everyone, welcome to the Fargo 3D Printing Podcast today. Jake Clark, John Schneider. So MakerBot just released a new version of their firmware and their slicer software this week. So we're going to actually break that down a little bit and kind of hit some of the highlights, the cool points that we see, and just kind of go over that. And so I have some notes here because there is a lot of different stuff that they've actually added in.
So here, first a little update on what the actual version number is. So this is MakerBot Desktop version 3.7. So if you opened up MakerBot Desktop recently, it may have said, "Hey, close down MakerBot Desktop," and the new version will automatically install or automatically update. If not, you can go to makerbot.com/desktop and download the most current version. And there's also a firmware update, at least for the 5th gen line of printers. Yes. So that's the Replicator Mini, Replicator 5th gen, and the Z18. I believe that went from version 1.7.0 to 1.7.1.
Yes.
So it doesn't appear to be a huge update, but an update nonetheless.
Yeah, so, and we'll put that in the link as well in the description so you guys can just go right there from here and get that updated if you haven't done it already. So really what kind of the 10,000 foot view of this update to the slicer software with this is their advanced or their custom is now more advanced or custom. So what they've actually done is before you could actually create a profile and then it would kind of look a little intimidating when you'd go in there to try and change things.
Because you'd need to open up a .json file, edit it in a text editor, and doing that wasn't so bad, but it was clunky to do it.
Cumbersome.
And the different lines of code weren't explained. So if you were changing something like extruder temperature was pretty straightforward. But
it was explained, but what you had to do is you actually had to go and find it. You had to go and click on the blue link, and then you had to go and read through a bunch of different pages, and so it was just very, very cumbersome.
But it wasn't explained right there. You had to go to another site. Basically, there were an extra 3 steps to figure out what each thing was. Then you'd have to go back through, look through the different lines of code, find the line of code you needed to edit, then save it, and it was, like Jake said, it was pretty clunky, and it just wasn't streamlined at all.
Yeah, where this now you hover over the certain area and you can actually, it gives a very one-sentence description, where the other stuff, it was like a paragraph and a lot of big words.
It's a tooltip. I mean, it basically, you hover over it, tooltip pops up, and it'll explain, hey, this is what this setting does, and you're going to need to play around with some of the settings to see what the impact on your print is going to be. But having access to this now is huge.
Yeah, because now you can change a bunch of different stuff. So now, let's just go over this. So in the first one,
so to kind of explain what you're looking at right now, how you're breaking down what you're explaining.
So this is on the 5th generation 3D printer, so the Replicator. And this is when you go into settings on the desktop, you hit settings, this will actually pop up, and it'll probably pop up with quick or custom depending on what you had selected in the prior version. Mm-hmm. So if you hit custom or you select custom or advanced, what it'll actually break down into is there's actually 7 different sections. So device settings, extrusion speeds, infill, model properties, raft, supports and bridging, and extruder. So in device settings, this is where you have your extruder temp, how fast your travel speed is, your z-axis travel speed, using the cool fan, so you can actually toggle that on and off. So if you're using a different material that you don't want to use cooling, or for whatever reason you don't want to.
Let's say you're going to experiment and try using ABS in your smart extruder. Not something we've tested, definitely not something we'd recommend at this point. Yeah. But let's say you were fine with voiding your warranty and you wanted to give it a shot. Here's where you could change that setting in the slicer.
Or Leawood, I don't know if that uses active cooling fan.
I think it does.
So, but some of those more exotic materials. So, and one thing that I think is really cool is fan power. So it's a percentage of max power. So it's defaulted at 50%, but you can actually change how fast that fan is. So that's really nice with some of the materials that require a higher cooling rate. That you can actually just crank that up right in the settings, and you don't have to really worry about it failing per se. But I think that was one of the cool things that I hadn't even seen in back in the profiles. Maybe I overlooked it, but I at the time did not see that in the profile settings for the fan power speed. Fan layer, so where does the fan actually start? At which layer does it start? This one's set at 1, so for whatever reason, if you don't want the fan on for the first 5 layers, you can change that.
For example, during the raft. On other 3D printers, it's common to have the fan off for the first 1 or 2 layers of the raft, mainly for a heated build plate, just to make sure that everything sticks well. It's not as big of an issue for the MakerBot printers, but keep in mind that a lot of these settings apply not just to the 5th gen line of printers, but also to the Replicator 2 and Replicator 2X. And depending on what printer you have selected, it's going to have different print setting options that you can change. For example, in this area, I think for device settings, you can actually, let's say you have the Z18, you can actually change the heated build chamber temperature. Or on the Replicator 2X, you can change the print bed temperature.
Yeah. And then the last thing in device settings for the fifth gen replicator is minimum layer duration. So, and this is kind of complicated to explain.
Well, not really.
Well,
it has to do with cooling.
Yeah.
Because if you're printing,
how often it cools per layer.
Yeah. So you said it's minimum layer duration. So let's say
I don't have an actual I don't have that little tooltip that it cranked out.
But basically, PLA is the biggest culprit of this, where if it's not cooled down enough, if you put a second layer on top of that first layer, and first layer is not cooled down enough, that first layer will be kind of mushy, so you're not going to have a well-defined part. So minimum layer duration will automatically slow down the speed for that layer to make sure it takes at least that amount of time. So if you set minimum layer duration to 5 seconds, it means that it will slow down that layer so it takes at least 5 seconds to print. Or if you put in 10 seconds, slowing it down so it takes at least 10 seconds to print. This gives it more opportunity to cool down.
Sorry, I got something in my eye.
Oh. It's like, man, you're just getting so emotional.
Such a beautiful definition of that, of layered whatever you just said. I'm just getting all teared up here.
Yeah.
So then extrusion speed. So this is where you can go through and change your print speed during bridges, during the first layer raft. So with the first layer raft, with the rafts, what it does is it actually lays a thicker bead of material so that it grips into your build plate, whether it's glass, blue painter's tape, gaffer's tape. There's a couple other ones out there. So it actually, you can slow that down and change that. So I won't dive too much into those settings, but there's quite a bit that you can change in the speeds.
Yeah, the great thing is that you can change those, you can have a different speed setting for each one of those different parameters. Where before, in your quick print settings, you could change just an overall speed. So you could change your print speed from, say, 90 millimeters per second to 110 millimeters per second, but you wouldn't know how it was affecting bridging speed or infill speed. So infill, you don't need to be as particular about. Print quality doesn't matter as much. Go ahead and have your infill speed higher than your perimeter speed.
Yeah. Then next part is actually talking about infill. So infill density, it's the same thing as what was on the quick or the simple side of things. You can change that. But the infill pattern, you can actually change to a couple different things now. You can have hexagonal, you can have cat, you can have shark, I believe. So, I mean, for your perfect parts, you can have the cat infill. Yeah, yeah.
Wow, Jake.
It's great. It's cat-tastic. It's actually a cat
Eric's
con.
Just sitting back there, shaking his head.
There's a cat con. Did you know that? There's a cat con.
No, they did it weird.
Oh, it's weird. I saw it on Snapchat. It's the weirdest thing. It's the weirdest thing. Whatever. Off topic, but so that's kind of interesting because we never use the different infills. We always stick with hexagonal.
Especially on the MakerBot, the hex is a great match between speed and strength.
Yeah,
it's really strong infill.
So model properties. So this is your layer height, your shells, your roof, and floor thicknesses. So and maybe you can dive a little bit into the infill layer height a little bit and explain that a little bit more. So layer height, regular layer height is how often it prints.
Yeah.
So what's the give a little background on the infill layer height?
So the reason that this is now accessible, and this is one of the things that MakerBot is really excited about for this new setting. So you can have your perimeter or your shells be one thickness, and then you can have your infill be a different thickness. So let's say you're printing a high quality part. You're printing at 0.1 millimeter layer height. Okay. Well, infill doesn't need to be 0.1 millimeter layer height, so you can change that to 0.2 millimeter layer height. So now it will do for every 2 perimeter layers, it will do 1 infill layer, but it'll be thicker. because on the inside of your part, the looks of it don't matter as much. Your resolution doesn't matter as much. So you're still going to have solid infill, or your infill is all going to be touching the same, but it's only going to print every other layer. It's just going to print it twice as thick. So this way, you'll be able to cut down on your print time. It won't change your material usage at all. It'll just save you time when it comes to printing, which on a high quality part, if you do 0.1 millimeter layer height, it takes a long time to print.
Yeah, and especially at like 50% infill.
Yeah.
Takes a really long time. So number of shells hasn't changed. Roof and floor thicknesses, so on the top surface of your part, that's how thick that's going to be.
Yeah.
So that's kind of model properties. Nothing too drastic there. With the raft, here you can change a bunch of different stuff with your raft. So if you select raft, you can go and you can change your raft model spacing, your number of base layers, your height, your extrusion density, your angle. You can change a bunch of different stuff with this. So you can really play with that and optimize it to whatever you're doing. If you are doing one of those specialty materials and there isn't print settings out there already, and you're kind of you're toying with it, you're playing with it, you can actually go in and really figure out the optimal settings.
Yeah, so this is one of the great things that we love about Simplify 3D is that you're able to change the raft settings. For example, how thick the raft is, the distance the raft is from the part. So, for example, if you're printing with something that has maybe has a lower melt point, so it sticks a little bit too well to the raft, now you can increase the distance from the raft to the part so that it will separate more easily. So this is a big thing for doing different materials. We found that the default settings in MakerBot Desktop work really well when you're working with PLA, but when you're working with some specialty materials, which we can't name quite yet, that we're working on, being able to change those print settings is a big deal.
Yeah.
So, what do you have here for the different print settings? Base extrusion width. So this is, you've probably seen this when MakerBot Desktop, when you're printing with a MakerBot machine, when it's laying down that first layer of the raft, like Jake was saying, it's a really thick bead, and this is where you control how wide that is. So here you can have it set to, well, it looks like the default is 2.5 millimeters wide, and based on how wide it looks when we've seen it print, that is how wide it is. Base layer density, like Jake said, the angle, all that stuff. And then there's a drop down here which we can't quite see in this printout, but interface layers. So interface layers, that's where it's really talking about how close that print is going to be to the raft. So that's going to affect how well it sticks or doesn't stick to the raft.
Yeah, so that's some really cool things with the raft. Supports and bridging. So this one, I'm kind of excited about a few things in this one. Really, is support angle. So at what angle will it actually go and activate support? So let's say you're having a part with a 45-degree angle. Typically, I'm just gonna kind of assume here that the software selects supports. Well, at 45 degrees,
I'm actually gonna check.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Oh, is it Zach?
Just getting up and walking out of the podcast. He's gonna get fired.
Wasn't sure if it was FedEx or we had someone come and pick up filament.
Yeah, we've had some people really excited about our filament. 3M USA, so check that out. But
nice segue. All right. Yep. Anyway, sorry about that.
Screwing things up, John. So the support angle. So at 45 degrees, let's say it was going to do a support angle or a support there. Well, you don't need it because it can go up to 70 technically, or it can go down to 70, I guess. From vertical, it can go down from 70. Well, this from vertical at 68. So from 68 down, it'll actually do supports. So that's kind of something cool where you can actually change that. And if 70 degrees is fine, and well, let me step back a little bit here. So if you go to the print preview and you look at 65 degree for support, and you realize, okay, there's a lot of supports in here. Then you go back and say, oh, well, 70 is fine. My angles will be fine. The surface finish at angle 70 is fine. Then it'll actually take some of the time off the print as well,
and save you material since you're printing less support. Save you on cleanup time afterwards. And
yeah.
I think, let's see, support density. So this is going to be kind of cool. You can change how dense those supports are. So if you have a lot of really fine features, you can have it denser. Or if you have just, it's a bigger part, you don't need to have the supports as dense. reduce that density. And I think support margin, and we're not able to look at the tooltip for this, but I believe support margin is the distance between the support and your part. So that's going to affect how easily the supports separate from your print.
And then leaky connections actually is another thing with that attributes to how it connects to that part, because a leaky connection is so that it can be easily removed. And if you uncheck that, it'll actually have a solid connection, so it's a little bit difficult, more difficult to remove, but it still obviously can be removed. But you might have to do some post-processing with that. And then the bridging. So the bridge length is 80 millimeters. So if you have a part, let's say you're going from the bunny ear to the top of this gear, that's 80 millimeters. It's not, but what it would do is it would bridge that. If it was 82, it would actually have supports with it. So you can actually change that. So if you want supports when it's only 20, only has 20 millimeters that it'll bridge, and anything over that, what this allows is so that you don't have stringiness in some of your overhangs, because we've seen that where there's some spots where we really would have liked to have had some supports, but due to the bridging setting, we couldn't have supports. Well, we could have if we went to the profile, but just with the basic, we wouldn't have been able to get rid of that stringiness. So this is really nice to have that, where you can go and change that setting if there's parts where you don't want that stringiness on overhangs.
So stringiness, keyword.
Stringiness, lots of stringiness. So then the last thing, and there's a couple cool things that I like about this. So the extruder is the last setting, at least in the 5th gen replicator. I think there's like 8 or 9 in the Rep 2X. The Rep 2 has, I think, 7. I don't know, but they're for each one. But so the extruder, first one is filament diameter. Default is 1.77. So that's interesting that they actually have 1.77 as the actual filament diameter, where if you look at like the 3D filament on our metrics, we actually have an average of 1.75 or 1.749. Well,
and something that I've noticed too, because when we first looked into these settings, not in the new version of MakerBot Desktop, but in the custom profiles before, we had to go in and edit that JSON file. It's always been 1.77 millimeters for the filament diameter, but when you measure MakerBot filament, it's actually closer to 1.75 millimeters. So I don't know if they're just saying, they're having this setting at 1.77 so that it kind of adjusts the flow rate, or it's some sort of compensation.
Well, I wonder if that's, then you have a little bit of over extrusion, so I'm wondering if that's why you have a 20 thousandths tolerance on like holes and stuff like that. I'm wondering if it's over extruding because of that reason, or it's trying to compensate for over under extrusion. But
well, I'm sure that's what it's doing.
So what you could do here is if you went in there and you saw our spool has 1.75, average is 1.75, you can go in there and change that for its average of 1.745. You can't go to 3 places, but you could go either one with that. So that was one thing that I thought was really interesting in this setting, was you could actually change that. I don't know if there's anything. There's a bunch of different stuff.
There's a bunch of retraction stuff. Restart speed, extra restart distance, extra restart speed, ooze distance, minimum ooze path length. This is something that we probably won't change. If you're playing with something, if you're working with a material like NinjaFlex, not on the 5th gen, but if you're working with NinjaFlex on the Rep 2, and I know some people have done that, that's something where you'd want to be playing around with these retraction and ooze settings, because with the retraction, you want to make sure it's not too aggressive with the NinjaFlex, otherwise you might start chewing into the filament. And same thing with ooze, because the NinjaFlex is going to be more likely to ooze out when it's at operating temperature, so you might need to compensate for that.
And maybe even the MakerBot flexible filament too. I know that's not as a big thing, right? As big as NinjaFlex, but the flexible filament, I know with just the Rep 2 settings we were working with probably 8 months ago, wasn't very good. There were some issues we were having with that. So, so that's kind of in a nutshell, and kind of a 10,000 foot overview of the new slicer, new version of slicer that came out.
So there are some other changes too, not just in these print settings, but now for the 5th gen line of printers, you can set it's easier to set a static IP address for the printers. And if you're connecting to Wi-Fi, you can connect to a hidden Wi-Fi network. So a hidden Wi-Fi network is one where you need to type in the exact name of the network and the exact password of the network. You can't just browse the open network. So if you want to keep your Wi-Fi network a little bit more secure, but still have your MakerBot 5th gen printer connected to it, that's a good way to do it. Some other things that changed now in device settings. So if you are in MakerBot Desktop, go to, I think it's Tools, Device Settings.
No, it's just Device Settings, System Preferences.
No, because it's...
What are you looking for?
I think it's Tools, Device Settings, because Device Settings,
what
it's
not...
What
are you looking for?
To the Smart Extruder details.
It's devices, System Preferences, or Device Preferences, one of the two.
Okay, that's what it is.
Device Preferences, and then you have to be connected via USB or Wi-Fi to the hardware to see what you're gonna see.
So connected.
Yeah. I didn't know you said connected. Sorry,
but yeah,
I was going back in my mind. I'm like, you're not going to the right tabs.
No, you're right. I couldn't remember those tabs. But so under device preferences, now you can see the Smart Extruder stats for that printer. So you can see what version of the Smart Extruder you have, how many hours you have on that Smart Extruder, how much filament it's pushed out, and what the current temperature is. So it's really useful if you want to know, hey, okay, how many hours do I have on this Smart Extruder, or which version of the Smart Extruder do I have? We've noticed that the difference between an 11.x Smart Extruder and a 12.x Smart Extruder is pretty substantial. The 12.x, so 12.1, 12.2, or 12.3, those Smart Extruders perform much more reliably than any previous versions do. So it's useful to know, hey, what version of the Smart Extruder do I have?
Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen with others. I don't know.
Then there's also, it's not a new feature, it's sort of a bug for the Rep 2 and the Rep 2X.
Yes.
When you're doing a print preview, it's going to start the print preview at layer 4, not at layer 1. So basically, you're not going to see your raft in the print preview. Basically.
Oh boy, I can't see my raft.
Well, I mean, if it's something that you're concerned about,
yeah,
it's just something to be aware of. If seeing where that raft is absolutely essential to your workflow, you might want to hold off on updating.
Yeah, and the one I know we haven't. So this is another issue that we've been running into. It's with the older slicer. We haven't tested with the newer slicer to see if this has fixed the issue. But with the previous version of Slicer and Simplify 3D, what we've noticed is that on Replicator 2s, the print will actually pause at 99%, and then we've had a couple issues where it actually stays heated. Well, actually, it does stay heated. It stays heated, which is kind of an issue. But the other day, we were printing a rabbit, which we haven't named yet.
And thank you for those of you who have submitted a naming idea. Some of them are very interesting, especially the ones that have a backstory to the name. I mean, we're talking. 3 paragraphs worth of this character's history. That's pretty huge.
Yeah,
so it's very, very cool. But
so keep submitting. We're still accepting submissions on that. If you win, you get a free spool of 3D filament. Yeah. Your size, the size that you want, and then So what we're doing, we're printing 2 of these side by side. And it actually paused at 99%, so it was doing the little ears. And then what happened was usually it would sit there and just stay on until the next day. Well, what happened was the build plate actually moved up and squished this entire bunny up into the extruder nozzle and then melted it. And then this is how it actually was in the morning.
Yeah.
What we found was that this actually happened right around 6 o'clock one evening, and nobody really noticed it until 8 o'clock the next morning. So that's kind of an issue that we'll be reporting to MakerBot because it's kind of a little bit of a hazard.
Yeah, it's a safety issue, definitely.
Yeah, it's just a little bit. So, and we'll see what they say and make sure that they get a fix for that, so this doesn't happen to other people out there and actually cause a fire or an issue. So, but yeah, because I walked in and I was like, Eric, how did this happen? I was like, this isn't a blob. How could it do a blob while it's still printing this? So we looked back and we ruined our active cooling duct, but we were able to 3D print it. It's out there on Thingiverse. Another cool thing that we have is the aluminum carriages. Sorry for the little segue here with the Rep 2, but these, we have a few of these in stock. So these are an aluminum upgrade to the current plastic and molded pieces on the Rep 2, or anything that is kind of a knockoff of a Rep 2 carriage. That'll fit. So
we've only tested it with the Rep 2 so far. So you can try it with other like Jake said, other knockoffs of the Rep 2, but we won't be able to guarantee that it'll work.
Yeah. So this is up on there. Definitely, oops, sorry, I hit the mic. If it's back ordered, we'll get those sent out right away as soon as possible. But there will be an instruction video on how to install this.
So, Jake,
soon.
what are the advantages of going with the aluminum carriage versus the existing injection molded?
The advantages is you can have higher temperatures. That's the one thing. So what this does is, because what would happen is if you go to like 280, 270, really with the current extruder, you're not supposed to go over 260 is the recommended, that you're not go over that temperature. But that's because the carriage can actually melt. So the aluminum will allow that so it doesn't melt, and so you can actually experiment with higher temp nylons or different various materials like that. And it adds a little bit of a heat sink to it as well, helps with some of the cooling. So, but the main thing is so that you can do higher temp materials. So it's probably about a 10-minute install. So yeah, I think we'll have a couple different kits. The one kit actually takes advantage of the current existing bearings. Then we'll have another kit where you can actually update the bearings to linear bearings that actually have the ball bearings in there instead of the sleeve.
Yeah, because right now it's basically a brass bushing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I believe it's a self-lubricating one. Self-lubricating, but you still should be putting some grease on that maintenance. So, but yeah, so this is something we've come out with. Definitely go take a look at it. Like I said, we'll have an install video up pretty shortly on that, to show you how to take that off. There's a little bit of a trick with the plastic one, not overly complicated, but it takes about 5-10 minutes to install.
Yeah.
So
I think that about takes care of it for this week. We had a few updates. We had the update for the MakerBot desktop, going over that. A little bit of the firmware, also talking about the thing to be careful of with the Replicator 2s.
And we'll update you hopefully next week when they say they have a fix. If they don't, I will shake the cage a little bit on that.
And then the Replicator 2 aluminum carriage. So that was this week's episode. On behalf of Jake Clark and myself, John Schneider, we want to thank you for watching the Fargo 3D Printing Show. If you haven't already, please subscribe to us on iTunes, or if you're watching this on YouTube, hit that red subscribe button. You'll find out all the new videos that we have coming up, new podcasts,
install videos,
new products, all of that stuff. And for the Rabbit, please keep those name submissions coming. We're on a bunch of different social media platforms. If you can think of it, we're probably active on it. So again, on behalf of Jake, myself, John, thanks for watching.
See ya. You can see the infiltrant of the color in this gear.
Oh yeah, that tooth broke.